How does a scrawny rubber kid in a beat-up straw hat go from getting laughed out of every tavern on the map to being one of the most wanted men alive, with the entire world holding its breath every single time his name gets brought up? Picture that first image, a barefoot 7-year-old crying because a pirate won't take him seriously, and then picture the second one. A grown man standing on the ashes of a tyrant's fortress with two of the strongest pirates in the world beaten at his feet. Nobody saw that journey coming. Not the Marines, not the other pirates, not the kings of the world, and honestly not even him most of the time. But here we are. This is the entire story of One Piece, the longest, wildest, most gloriously ridiculous adventure anime has ever put to screen, and somehow also one of the most heartfelt stories ever told. It is about a treasure that may or may not even exist, 100 years of history somebody tried very hard to erase, and one kid who just wants to be free. Fair warning, this one is absolutely massive, so grab a snack and settle in, because we are covering all of it. By the end of this, you are going to understand exactly why over 1 billion people across the planet refuse to shut up about this show. So without further ado, let's get right into it. It all begins in a quiet little place called Fuchsia Village, where a pirate named Red-Haired Shanks and his crew have docked to relax for a while. A wide-eyed 7-year-old named Monkey D. Luffy idolizes these pirates and desperately wants to join them, but Shanks keeps gently telling him he is way too young. Luffy, being Luffy, is far too proud to take that lying down, and to prove how tough he is, he stabs himself right under the eye, which earns him that iconic scar and absolutely zero respect from the crew. One day, while sulking in the bar, Luffy spots a strange purple fruit the pirates had stashed away and gulps the whole thing down in one go. Big mistake, or maybe the best mistake of his entire life. This is the gum gum fruit, a devil fruit, and it turns his whole body into stretchy rubber. The catch is that anyone who eats a devil fruit can never swim again for the rest of their life, which for a kid who dreams of sailing the open seas is just a fantastic decision. Shanks finds the whole thing hilarious. Things turn deadly serious, though, when some local mountain bandits led by a brute named Higuma humiliate Shanks in the bar, pouring a drink over his head while the crew just laughs it off, which secretly infuriates Luffy, who thinks they should have fought back. Later, those same bandits kidnap Luffy and toss him out into the open ocean as bait. A massive sea king swallows the bandit whole and then comes barreling toward Luffy, and Shanks appears in an instant, scaring the monster off with nothing but a glare, but losing his entire left arm in the process. He does not even flinch about it. He just smiles and tells Luffy his arm was a small price to pay for his life. Before sailing off for good, Shanks kneels down and places his treasured straw hat, the one he himself received from a great pirate long ago, on Luffy's head and tells him to return it one day, once he has grown into a great pirate worthy of it. That single moment is the seed of the whole series. Luffy makes a vow right there and then that he will gather a crew, sail to the very end of the sea, find the legendary treasure called the One Piece, and become the king of the pirates. Hold on to that promise, because every single thing that happens from this point on is built on top of it. 10 years later, a teenage Luffy finally sets out to sea all by himself in a tiny rowboat, which promptly gets swallowed by a giant whirlpool. Because of course it does. He survives by hiding inside a barrel and ends up aboard a ship run by a vain, club-swinging lady pirate named Alvida. Here, he meets a meek, pink-haired boy named Kobe, who has been forced into pirate servitude under Alvida for years and secretly dreams of becoming a marine someday, even though he is too afraid to admit it out loud. Luffy's fearless honesty rubs off on him fast. Luffy flattens Alvida without breaking a sweat after Kobe finally finds the nerve to declare his dream. And he drops the boy off near a marine base so he can chase it, and just like that, the adventure is officially rolling. At that very base, Luffy hears about a captured swordsman tied to a cross in a yard, none other than the infamous pirate hunter Roronoa Zoro. Zoro got himself imprisoned for protecting a little girl from the base's spoiled brat of a marine, Helmeppo, whose father is the corrupt and power-mad Captain Morgan. Zoro carries a dream of his own, to become the greatest swordsman in the entire world, a promise he made to a childhood rival and friend named Kuina, the dojo master's daughter who was a far better swordsman than him and who tragically died young in an accident, leaving Zoro to carry both of their dreams and her sword forward. Luffy decides on the spot that he wants this guy on his crew, no matter what. He frees Zoro, hands him back his swords, and together they take down the entire base and the egomaniac Morgan, with Kobe finding the courage to stand up for himself too. Zoro becomes Luffy's very first official crewmate and right-hand man. Oh, and Zoro fights using a 3-sword style, holding one blade in his mouth and one in each hand, which makes absolutely no anatomical sense and is somehow the coolest thing ever. With 2 members down, the crew needs supplies and a real ship, so they head to a town secretly run by a devil fruit clown named Buggy. On the way, Luffy crosses paths with a sharp-tongued thief and master navigator named Nami, who is in the middle of conning Buggy out of his treasure. Buggy, by the way, ate a fruit that lets him split his body into floating, separate pieces, so slicing him apart is basically useless, and he holds a bitter grudge connected to his shared past with Shanks. Luffy and Buggy clash hard, with Buggy's beast tamer Moji and acrobat Kabaji backing him up, and with help from a loyal little dog named Shocho stubbornly guarding his late owner's pet shop, and the town's brave drunk of a mayor, Boodle, who refuses to let the pirates burn down everything he spent his life building. Luffy ends up launching the clown clean into the sky like a balloon, scattering his body parts everywhere. The town is saved. Nami sticks around afterward, because, frankly, this crew is a band of idiots who could not navigate their way out of a bathtub. She is not officially joining yet, but she is clearly in for now, mostly because she can smell the treasure on the horizon. The crew's next stop is a peaceful little place called Syrup Village, where they meet a long-nosed chronic liar named Usopp, who runs around every morning shouting that pirates are coming just to mess with the townsfolk. Usopp spends his days entertaining a sweet but sickly rich girl named Kaya with wild made-up stories, alongside his 3 tiny followers, the Usopp Pirates. The problem is, this time pirates actually are coming, and they have been hiding right under everyone's nose. Kaya's trusted butler, a man named Klahadore, is secretly the notorious Captain Kuro of the Black Cat Pirates, a brilliant strategist who faked his own death years ago to retire in comfort and now plans to murder Kaya and steal her entire fortune. Usopp, the supposed coward, is the only one who refuses to let it happen, even when nobody believes his warnings. Together with the Straw Hats, he sets up an ambush on a slope, and after a chaotic battle against Kuro's hypnotist, Django, and the Cat Brothers crew, Luffy delivers the knockout blow to Kuro himself. A grateful Kaya, whose life Usopp risked everything to save, gives the crew their very first real ship, a small caravel she designed herself and names the Going Merry after her caretaker, and Usopp joins as the crew's sniper and resident scaredy cat, finally sailing off to chase the same dream of the sea that his pirate father left to pursue years ago. Now, they finally have a proper vessel and a proper crew starting to take real shape. Hungry and adrift, the crew sails to a floating restaurant on the open sea called the Barati, and this is where we meet the 4th core member, a chivalrous, chain-smoking cook named Sanji. Sanji has one unbreakable rule, that he will never let anyone starve, and he fights exclusively with his legs because his hands are a cook's most precious treasure. He works under the restaurant's gruff, peg-legged owner, a former pirate named Zeph, and we slowly learn the gut punch behind their bond. Years ago, when the 2 of them were stranded and starving together on a barren rock with almost no food, Zeph secretly ate nothing at all, and even cut off his own leg to survive, quietly giving every last scrap to a young Sanji, who never found out until much later. The peace at the Barati shatters when a heavily armored pirate fleet admiral named Don Krieg, the self-styled strongest man in the East Blue, attacks the very restaurant that had just generously fed his dying, starving crew. It all started because a grateful, half-dead pirate named Gin, Krieg's own loyal commander, told his boss about the kind cook who fed him when he was at death's door, and Krieg decided to repay that mercy by trying to seize the whole restaurant and its supplies for himself. Krieg's entire armada of 50 ships had been wiped out in a single afternoon in the deadly Grand Line, and the man who slaughtered them is the one who now arrives chasing him down. Almost casually, the greatest swordsman in the entire world, Draculi Mihawk, sails up in a coffin-shaped boat and utterly dismantles Zoro using nothing but a tiny cross-shaped dagger, not even bothering to draw his massive black blade until the very last second. Zoro takes the crushing loss, swears on his own blood that he will never lose again until the day he surpasses this man. And that single vow drives him for the entire rest of the series. Mihawk, intrigued by the boy's spirit, tells him to grow strong and come find him again, and we learn this same swordsman was once the great rival of Shanks himself, back before Shanks lost his arm. Luffy beats down Don Krieg in a brutal brawl. Sanji finally accepts that it is time to leave the nest and chase his own lifelong dream of finding the legendary ocean called the All Blue, a mythical sea where the fish of every ocean in the world gather in one place, and after a tearful goodbye where he drops to his knees and thanks the old man for everything, he joins the crew as the cook. The core is almost complete. Then the show drops its first real emotional bomb. Nami suddenly steals the Going Merry and abandons the crew without warning, and Luffy chases her all the way back to her home, a cluster of villages held hostage by a fishman pirate named Arlong. Here is the heartbreak. Years ago, Arlong's crew conquered Nami's island and ruled it through terror and heavy taxes. And when Nami's loving adoptive mother, a former Marine named Bellamere, who took in 2 orphaned girls despite having almost nothing herself, refused to deny that Nami and her older sister Nojiko were her daughters in exchange for her life, Arlong shot her dead right in front of the 2 girls. To save her entire village from slaughter, a young Nami struck a deal with the devil, agreeing to buy back the town for the impossible sum of 100 million berries, then working herself half to death as Arlong's personal mapmaker for years, drawing charts for the very pirate who killed her mother, while everyone in town came to believe she had betrayed them. When she finally scrapes together the full amount, a corrupt marine officer named Nezumi, tipped off by Arlong, raids her stash and seizes every last coin, crushing the deal and her spirit in one stroke. Nami completely breaks, stabbing at her own Arlong tattoo over and over, and for the first time ever she tearfully asks Luffy for help. Luffy gives her his straw hat to hold, storms Arlong Park, and after Zoro, Sanji, and Usopp tear through Arlong's brutal officers, the octopus swordsman Hatchin, the karate expert Karubi, and the sharpshooter Chu, Luffy personally smashes the entire stronghold to rubble with Arlong inside it, freeing Nami and all of her people for good, while her village's gruff protector Genzo watches in disbelief. Nami joins the crew for real this time as the navigator, and her arc is the exact moment a whole lot of people fall completely in love with this show. Wow, the whole village waves the crew off as wanted criminals with massive smiles on their faces. With a real navigator finally on board, the crew reaches Logue Town, the very town where the previous pirate king, Gold Roger, was both born and publicly executed. In a chillingly perfect moment, Luffy climbs the exact execution platform where Roger died, just to see what the king saw, and grins like a maniac, which is the most main character thing he could possibly do. Buggy the Clown, now teamed up with a slimmed-down Alvida, returns hungry for revenge and very nearly takes Luffy's head clean off right there on the platform, only for a freak bolt of lightning to blast the entire scaffold and somehow leave Luffy completely unharmed, because the universe clearly has much bigger plans for this kid. A smoke-powered marine captain named Smoker, who becomes a recurring thorn in Luffy's side for years to come, corners Luffy in the rain and very nearly catches him in the chaos, until a mysterious tattooed man in a green cloak named Dragon, the leader of the Revolutionary Army and the most wanted man in the entire world, appears out of nowhere, blocks Smoker, and a sudden gust of wind lets Luffy slip away into the storm. Burn that name into your memory, seriously, because Dragon is going to matter enormously down the line, especially once you learn exactly who he is to Luffy. Resupplied and fired up, the Straw Hats finally point their bow toward the Grand Line, the single deadliest stretch of ocean in the entire world, where the One Piece is said to wait at the very end. To even enter the Grand Line, the crew has to sail straight up a mountain. Yes, an actual mountain, on water, because this show runs entirely on dream logic, and it absolutely rules. At the mountain's base, they meet a colossal whale named Laboon, who has spent 50 long years headbutting the sheer cliff face, waiting for a pirate crew that promised to come back and never did. Luffy promises to return and have a real fight with the whale one day, painting their flag right on Laboon's forehead as a vow. They also meet an old kind doctor named Crocus, the whale's caretaker, who explains how navigation actually works out here, using a special compass called a log pose that slowly locks onto an island's magnetic field. They even briefly run into two odd agents named Mr. Kate 9 and Miss Wednesday. The very first island the crew reaches, Whiskey Peak, welcomes them with a wild all-night party. But it turns out the entire town is a front for a massive criminal syndicate called Baroque Works. A princess traveling in disguise, going by the codename Miss Wednesday, but really named Princess Nefertari Vivi, reveals along with her loyal retainer that she has been working deep undercover to expose the syndicate's shadowy boss, known only as Mr. Zero. Zoro single-handedly fends off basically the entire town of bounty hunters in a single night, and Vivi reveals that Mr. Zero is none other than Sir Crocodile, one of the 7 warlords of the sea, government-sanctioned pirates with terrifying power and a public hero's reputation. Crocodile is secretly using Baroque Works to engineer a brutal civil war and seize Vivi's homeland, the proud desert kingdom of Alabasta. So now the crew has a real mission with real stakes. Get Vivi home and stop an entire country from tearing itself apart. Along the way, they stop at Little Garden, a prehistoric jungle island still crawling with living dinosaurs, where 2 enormous ancient giants named Dory and Brogy have been locked in an honorable one-on-one duel against each other for over 100 years, simply because neither will accept a draw. A sly Baroque Works agent named Mr. 3, who can create and harden wax at will, traps the crew and tries to slowly turn them into wax statues for a giant candle display, but they outwit him, protect the giant's honor, and escape, with the towering pair sending them off as friends. The next island is Drum, a frozen kingdom whose cowardly tyrant king, Wapol, abandoned his own people the instant a powerful pirate threatened the island years earlier. Nami suddenly falls dangerously ill with a high fever, so the crew climbs a treacherous frozen mountain to find the legendary witch doctor who supposedly lives at the peak, an ancient, sharp-tongued old woman named Dr. Kureha, who is somehow still spry at over 130. They also meet her apprentice, a shy, blue-nosed reindeer named Tony Chopper, who ate a devil fruit that lets him talk and shift between several different forms, as well as a kind-hearted former royal guard named Dalton, who has been quietly protecting the abandoned villagers from Wapple's return. Chopper's backstory is an absolute tearjerker. Rejected by both the reindeer herd and by humans for being a freak who belonged to neither world, he was taken in by a kind-hearted quack doctor named Dr. Hiluluk, who ultimately sacrificed his own life trying to prove to a hopeless town that no disease in the world is truly incurable, leaving behind a dream of one day healing everyone. When the gluttonous Wapol comes barging back to reclaim his stolen throne, Luffy launches him clean into orbit, and Hiluluk's old experimental cure, fired into the sky by Dr. Kureha, finally goes off, painting the entire frozen island sky in falling pink cherry blossoms above the doctor's old pirate flag, a skull and crossbones, as a send-off to the man's impossible dream. Chopper joins the crew as the ship's doctor, screaming that being called their friend does not make him happy in the slightest, while visibly wiggling with pure joy. He becomes everyone's instant favorite for very good reason. Finally, the crew arrives in Alabasta, a vast desert kingdom teetering on the absolute brink of civil war, its starving people manipulated by Crocodile into believing their good king caused the mysterious nationwide drought. On the way in, Luffy runs straight into his older brother Portgas D. Ace, the second in command of Whitebeard's crew, a confident, warm-hearted pirate with the power of fire who is hunting down a traitor from his division named Blackbeard, who murdered a crewmate and fled. Ace and Luffy share a warm reunion, and we get our first hint of just how much these two brothers mean to each other. Remember both Ace and Blackbeard, because both of these names are going to absolutely shake this entire story to its foundation later on. Ace lends the crew a hand for a bit, holds off the pursuing smoker, and then heads off to continue his own hunt. As tensions across the kingdom explode, the crew splits up across the burning desert with a single desperate goal: to physically stop the massive rebel army and the royal army from butchering each other, while Crocodile gleefully pulls every string from the shadows. Along the way, they tangle with the whole roster of Baroque Works agents, a weight-changing duo, a wax-fingered swordsman named Mr. One, whose body can turn entirely to blades and who pushes Zoro to learn how to cut steel itself, and most memorably, a flamboyant ballet-dancing Okama agent named Mr. Two Bon Clay, who can perfectly copy anyone's face and voice just by touching them, and who, believe it or not, ends up becoming one of the most beloved characters in the entire series. Vivi races across the kingdom trying to stop the two armies from clashing in the capital, while the crew confronts Crocodile at his casino fortress, Rain Dinners, where the warlord reveals his true endgame, an operation he calls Utopia, designed to make it look like the rebellion destroyed the kingdom so he can swoop in as its savior and seize total control. The secret plot to detonate a massive cannon-fired bomb in the crowded city square during the final battle gets uncovered, and the king's loyal guardians, the duck-riding Pell and the jackal warrior Chaka, fight to the bitter end to protect their people. Pell even sacrifices himself by grabbing the giant bomb and flying it high into the sky to detonate harmlessly above the city, somehow surviving against all odds. We also learn that Crocodile was after something buried beneath the kingdom this whole time, the location of an ancient weapon of mass destruction called Pluton, written on one of the forbidden poneglyph stones that only Nico Robin can read. Luffy, meanwhile, throws down with Crocodile himself in a savage 3-round war across the kingdom. Crocodile is a sandman who can dry the very moisture out of Luffy's body and crumble into dust whenever Luffy tries to land a hit, and he beats Luffy down twice, first poisoning him with his hook and then leaving him impaled and bleeding out, buried in the desert sand, looking for all the world like the hero just lost. But Luffy realizes that water and his own blood neutralize the sand, and let him land real, solid blows, and in the brutal third and final round, he finally connects, blasting the warlord straight up through the city's underground waterways and ending the war for good. Vivi makes the bittersweet choice to stay behind and rule and rebuild her people rather than sail away with the crew, and their goodbye, where she stands on the docks and asks if the crew will still consider her a friend, even though she will now be the princess of a kingdom while they remain wanted criminals. And the entire crew, already sailing away and unable to answer out loud without exposing her, silently rolls up their left sleeves to reveal a matching mark of friendship drawn on their arms so only she can see it, is one of the most beautiful farewells in the whole series. Her loyal pet duck Karoo even tries to chase the ship into the sea. During all of this chaos, a calm, mysterious woman quietly stows away aboard the ship. This is Nico Robin, formerly Crocodile's cold and capable second in command, who wields a devil fruit that lets her sprout copies of her own arms, legs, and even eyes and ears out of any surface she chooses. Having just been saved by Luffy almost against her own will after deciding she had nothing left to live for, she carries a heavy, secret past she refuses to share, but for now she quietly joins the crew as the archaeologist, and the Straw Hats sail onward toward the next leg of the Grand Line. That next leg is one of the most imaginative stretches in the entire show. Following a strange map and rumors, the crew sets their sights on a legendary city of gold that supposedly sits in the sky itself. They land on Jaya, a rough, lawless pirate island where an arrogant rookie pirate named Bellamy publicly humiliates Luffy and Zoro for being childish enough to believe in fairy tales like Sky Islands. In a moment that perfectly defines who Luffy is, he and Zoro choose to simply take the beating without fighting back and walk out of the bar, because their dreams are worth far more to them than their pride ever will be. They get help reaching the sky from a sunburned old treasure hunter named Mont Blanc Cricket, a lonely descendant of an explorer the world once branded a liar, along with his two boisterous monkey diving partners, Masira and Shoju. There is also a brief but deeply ominous run-in at a bar with a cheerful, gap-toothed pirate named Blackbeard, real name Marshall D. Teach, who drops a now-famous line about how people's dreams will never die, and trust me, that quiet little scene becomes hugely important down the road. The arrogant Bellamy, meanwhile, gets humiliated soon after, when his own idol mocks him, a small moment that quietly shows the old age of cynical pirates is ending, and the age of dreamers like Luffy is beginning. To actually reach the sky, the crew rides a colossal vertical column of water called the Knock-Up Stream, which erupts from the sea and launches their entire ship straight up through the clouds at terrifying speed. the whole Going Merry creaking and groaning under the strain as it rockets toward a layer of solid cloud miles above the ocean. Completely unhinged, and it somehow works. Way up in the clouds sits Skypiea, a stunningly beautiful island of clouds ruled by a cruel, self-proclaimed god named Enel. Enel is a lightning man who genuinely believes he is a true deity, and his devil fruit gives him a heightened sense that lets him hear everything happening across the entire island, making him almost impossible to sneak up on or surprise. The island's original people, a proud warrior tribe called the Shandians led by a fierce, dial-armed fighter named Wiper, have been fighting a centuries-long war to reclaim their stolen homeland. Enel's grand plan is to wipe out every last person on the island in a deadly survival game he calls the Trial, and then float away forever to the moon, which he calls the Endless Fairy Verth, as the crew gets dragged into Enel's deadly survival game, where each of them has to outlast his 4 powerful priests, Om, Gadatsu, Satori, and Shura. Through a series of brutal ordeals across the Cloud Forest, they slowly uncover the tragic history beneath it all. The whole island runs on strange seashell devices called dials that can store and release wind, sound, heat, and even impact. And the Shandians and the Cloud Dwellers have been fighting over this stolen sky for generations. They also meet a kind old former sky god named Ganfall and a gentle local girl named Conus, whose people were caught in the middle. Centuries ago, a brave explorer named Mont Blanc Noland discovered this very golden city, which back then sat on the surface, and reported it back to his kingdom, only to be publicly executed as a liar when the city later vanished without a trace, having actually been blasted up into the sky on a freak vertical current. The deep friendship between Noland and a Shandian warrior named Calgera, and the misunderstanding that tore them apart, is the beating emotional heart of the whole arc. Luffy, being made entirely of rubber, conveniently turns out to be the one person on the whole island completely immune to Enel's lightning, which is the single most perfectly convenient matchup in the entire show. He punches the false god clean off his floating throne and rings the island's massive ancient golden bell, the very same bell Noland once heard ringing all those years ago, finally proving across 4 full centuries that the man was telling the truth the entire time. It is a gorgeous, deeply emotional story quietly hiding inside an arc about a guy who thinks he is God, and after Enel blasts off toward his lonely moon in a giant golden arc, the crew leaves richer in both gold and in heart, having stripped enough treasure to gild parts of their own ship. Back down on the blue sea, the crew lands on a strange long island and gets roped into a Davy backfight, a series of ridiculous pirate competitions against a captain named Foxy the Silver Fox, where the wagered prize is each other's actual crew members. It is mostly lighthearted, goofy filler fun, complete with a lonely old man named Tanjit and his horse. But the whole arc ends on a deadly serious note when one of the most powerful men in the entire world simply strolls up to them on the beach. This is Marine Admiral Okiji, a lazy-looking, perpetually sleepy Iceman with absolutely terrifying power, and he calmly reveals that he knows all about Nico Robin's dark, hidden past and the danger she has carried since childhood. To make a point, he freezes Robin solid in an instant and nearly kills the entire crew without effort, choosing to let them live only as a warning of what is coming. For the very first time, the crew truly grasps just how impossibly far above their level the Marine top brass really is, and it quietly sets the stakes for everything that follows. That brings us to one of the single greatest, most beloved stretches in the entire series. The crew sails into Water 7, a sprawling, gorgeous city built on canals where the world's finest shipwrights live and work, hoping to finally repair their beloved Going Merry, which has been battered nearly to death by everything it has carried them through. Almost immediately, everything goes sideways. The huge pile of gold they earned in Skypiea gets stolen right out from under them by a wild cyborg dismantler gang led by a loud, eccentric, Speedo-wearing cyborg named Frankie. The crew then seeks out the city's elite shipwright company, Galley La, run by a beloved, eccentric mayor named Iceberg, only to receive truly devastating news. That the Going Merry's keel is cracked beyond any possible repair, and the ship simply cannot sail much longer. Luffy makes the brutal but necessary captain's call to find a new ship, and Usopp, who loves the Merry more deeply than anyone since it was the first real home he ever had, completely cannot accept letting it die. In a heartbreaking turn, he challenges Luffy to a one-on-one duel over the ship and then leaves the crew entirely. It genuinely hurts to watch, and even though Luffy wins, absolutely nobody feels good about it. On top of all this emotional wreckage, a secret world government assassination unit called Cypher Pole Number 9, or CP9 for short, who had been hiding in plain sight as ordinary citizens this entire time, finally reveals itself. Their leader is a cold, ruthless cat Zoan killer named Rob Lucci, and they frame the Straw Hats for a near-fatal attack on Iceberg to throw the city against them. Their true target all along is Nico Robin, and the unique ancient knowledge she alone possesses, specifically her forbidden ability to read the history-bearing stones called poneglyphs. Believing with all her heart that she is cursed to bring death and ruin to everyone who ever gets close to her, Robin willingly surrenders herself to the government to spare the crew, allowing CP9 to drag her off toward the judicial island of Enies Lobby and certain execution. The crew, of course, has absolutely no intention whatsoever of letting that stand. Enies Lobby is where this entire show kicks into a completely different gear. The Straw Hats, joined by the cyborg Frankie and a ragtag band of allies, ride a runaway sea train called the Rocket Man straight through a brutal city flooding storm called Aqua Laguna and launch an all-out assault on a heavily fortified government stronghold, all to rescue one single friend, against impossibly stacked odds. After smashing through a pair of giant gatekeepers named Oimo and Kashi, who had been tricked into serving the government for decades, fighting past CP9's agents, and crossing the towering gates of justice themselves, they reach the Great Tower, where Robin is being held in sea-stone chains over a death sentence. To even get inside, Luffy debuts his blistering new Gear Second mode against a door-controlling agent named Blueno. The Marines and CP9's cowardly, slimy chief Spandam assume Robin will simply go quietly to her death, but Luffy has Usopp, who has rejoined in secret while hiding his identity behind a mask and calling himself Sogeking, set the world government's own flag ablaze with a flame dial right in front of the entire assembled base. By openly attacking that sacred flag, the crew is literally declaring war on the single most powerful organization on the entire planet, all just to save one Nakama. And then comes the moment. Robin, who has spent her whole life utterly convinced that nobody on Earth truly wanted her alive, finally breaks down and screams from the depths of her soul that she wants to live, that she wants to sail the seas with this crew, and the entire crew roars right back that this, all of this, is exactly why they came. Chills every single time, no matter how often you watch it. We then finally learn Robin's full tragic history, the destruction of her childhood home, Ohara, an island of brilliant scholars led by a gentle old professor named Clover, who quietly studied the forbidden true history of the world hidden in the poneglyphs, and who were branded criminals and wiped out in a devastating government bombardment called a Buster Call, ordered by the cold official Spandam's own father. A young Robin survived only because a gentle, laughing giant named Jaguar D. Saul, a defecting Marine, taught her how to smile through her tears and pushed her to safety with his dying effort, and a single sympathetic admiral looked the other way and let her flee, leaving her hunted with a massive bounty since she was only 8 years old. Luffy confronts Rob Lucci in a final, savage, drawn-out duel where he unveils brand new techniques born from his training, pumping his own blood faster around his body to move at blinding speed and hit twice as hard in a mode he calls Gear Second, his whole body steaming red and inflating his own bones with air to grow enormous and strike like a giant in a mode called Gear Third. Meanwhile, Zoro fights the giraffe, Zoan Kaku, and Sanji battles the wolf, Zoan Jabra. Luffy barely wins his fight, beating Lucci within an inch of his own life. As the rescued crew flees the now collapsing island under a falling Buster Call bombardment, they receive one final miracle. The Going Merry, somehow still clinging to life, sails itself in through the smoke to carry them all to safety one last time before finally breaking apart for good in the water. The crew gives the dying ship a tearful Viking funeral as it burns, thanking it for carrying them through everything, with the ship's fading voice apologizing for not being strong enough to take them any further. Grown adults openly sob at this scene. It is a wooden boat. It does not matter, you will cry too. In the aftermath, the cyborg Frankie, who it turns out was the apprentice of the legendary master shipwright Tom, the very man who built Gold Roger's ship the Oro Jackson and who was executed by the government for that crime, constructs the crew a magnificent new dream vessel out of a sacred, nearly indestructible treasure wood called Atom Wood, and he joins the crew as the new shipwright. We learn Frankie carries decades of guilt, having once accidentally helped doom his own mentor Tom and the city's good name, and that the mayor Iceberg was Tom's other apprentice and Frankie's old friend. They name the new ship the Thousand Sunny. The crew also gets a surprise visit from Luffy's own grandfather, the legendary marine hero Vice Admiral Monkey D. Garp, the man who famously cornered Gold Roger himself many times, who casually drops two absolutely world-shaking facts on everyone. First, that the world's single most wanted criminal and leader of the rebel revolutionary army, Dragon, is in fact Luffy's father. And second, that Garp himself, a marine legend, is Luffy's grandfather, meaning he tried for years to beat the pirate dream out of Luffy and raise him into a marine instead. So Luffy is a rookie pirate, his father is the world's top revolutionary, and his grandpa is a marine hero, which is hands down the most chaotic family tree in all of fiction. Luffy's bounty skyrockets to 300 million berries after Enies Lobby, an enormous number for a rookie. The entire world suddenly starts treating him as a genuine emerging threat. His old friend Kobe and the former brat Helmeppo have also risen through the marine ranks into capable young officers, and the crew sets sail again on their brand new ship with the whole crew, including a finally returned Usopp, who swallows his pride and begs to come back, fully reunited. Their next adventure carries them to a haunted, fog-shrouded floating island called Thriller Bark, which is secretly the largest ship ever built, ruled over by a creepy, lazy warlord named Gecko Moria. Moria steals living people's shadows and stuffs them into stitched-together corpses built by a mad surgeon named Dr. Hogback to create himself a loyal army of obedient zombies, all watched over by a ghost-summoning girl named Perona, whose hollows can drain anyone's will to live. Moria rips out Luffy's own shadow to animate a gigantic, ancient zombie warrior named Oars. Brook even gets to reclaim his honor by defeating the zombie of a legendary samurai named Ryuma, who had been given Brook's old shadow and sword. The crew also teams up with the dozens of other pirates and warriors whose shadows Maria stole, all desperate to get them back before sunrise. The crew also meets a Tofat-wearing, Afro-sporting living skeleton named Brook, a cheerful, perverted musician who is conscious and walking around only because his own stolen shadow is keeping his bones animated. Brook is endlessly hilarious, cracking skull puns and asking to see ladies' underwear, but he is also secretly deeply tragic. The sole survivor of an entire crew that died long ago. A crew that once made a heartfelt promise to return to that very whale, Laboon, back at the entrance to the Grand Line. Brook spent decades drifting completely alone in the dark fog as nothing but bones, his devil fruit having brought his soul back to his own corpse, slowly going mad from the loneliness, which makes his rescue all the more moving. After a long, chaotic, genuinely nightmarish battle where Luffy has to fight his own enlarged shadow inside the body of the giant zombie Oars, the crew defeats Maria and frees every last one of the stolen shadows, returning them to their rightful owners across the island. Brook joins the crew as the musician, finally gaining the chance to one day cross the Grand Line, reach the very end, and keep his ancient promise to play music for Laboon again, the whole reason his lonely soul held on for half a century. But the arc ends on a cold, deeply ominous note when another warlord, the silent, enormous Bartholomew Kuma, arrives on government orders with the power to physically repel and push away anything at all, including abstract things like pain and exhaustion. He offers to spare the whole exhausted crew on one condition, that they hand over their captain's head, and when everyone refuses, he agrees instead to let them live if someone will take on all of Luffy's accumulated injuries. In one of the single most legendary acts of loyalty in the entire series, an already half-dead Zoro secretly volunteers to absorb the entire mountain of pain and damage that Luffy had built up during the fight, a bubble of agony so enormous it nearly kills him on the spot. And when Sanji finds him standing alone in a field, drenched head to toe in his own blood afterward. Zoro simply tells him nothing happened. Nobody ever speaks of that moment again. That is exactly what loyalty looks like in this show. Then comes a brief calm right before an absolutely enormous storm. The crew arrives at the Sabaody Archipelago, the lawless final waypoint before the second, far deadlier half of the Grand Line known as the New World. Here we meet an entire generation of fearsome rookie pirates dubbed the 11 Supernovas, all of whom arrived around the same time with bounties over 100 million, including a calm, scheming surgeon named Trafalgar Law, a savage, spiky-haired captain named Eustace Kid, a sound-based brawler named Killer, and a quiet, hungry monk named Uruge, several of whom become absolutely major players in the world to come. The crew also gets a sickening, infuriating look at the celestial dragons, the so-called world nobles, who are the direct descendants of the world's original founding kings, men who wear sealed bubble helmets so they do not have to breathe the same air as commoners, who keep human slaves, and who shoot people in the street for sport. When one of these monsters callously shoots Luffy's fishman friend Hachan, and then takes Luffy's mermaid friend Kami to be sold at a human auction house, Luffy storms the auction and does the absolutely unthinkable, punching a celestial dragon square in the face in front of a horrified crowd, which instantly summons the full, overwhelming wrath of the world government down onto the crew. In the chaos, the legendary old first mate of Gold Roger himself, Silvers Rayleigh, reveals he has been living quietly on the island and steps in to help, and the other supernovas like Kid and Law fight alongside the Straw Hats against the Marines. But it is not enough. An admiral named Kizaru, a being who can move and attack at the literal speed of light, arrives along with the warlord Kuma, his commander Sentomaru, and an entire army of mass-produced human weapon copies called Pacifista that wear Kuma's exact face. The crew is hopelessly, brutally outmatched on every level. In a devastating sequence, the mysterious Kuma, acting on some unknown plan that we will only understand the weight of much, much later, uses his power to blast each individual Straw Hat clean across the world to a completely different and distant location, sending Zoro, Nami, Sanji, and the rest flying off to far-flung islands one by one as they watch each other vanish into thin air, utterly helpless to stop any of it. It is gut-wrenching to watch, tearing the crew apart at the exact moment things were finally starting to go their way. Only much later does anyone realize Kuma may have been protecting them, scattering them somewhere safe rather than letting the Admiral kill them. They are saved from total destruction, but completely separated across the globe. Luffy himself gets launched onto a hidden island of warrior women called Amazon Lily, ruled by a stunningly beautiful but ruthless pirate empress and warlord named Boa Hancock, who along with her two sisters was once captured and enslaved by the celestial dragons as a child, and branded on the back, a shameful secret she hides from her own people. She slowly, hilariously, falls head over heels for Luffy precisely because he is far too dense and good-hearted to care about her beauty, her power, or her painful past, and because he genuinely does not flinch when he learns her secret. It is funny and surprisingly tender, and Luffy even unconsciously unleashes a rare burst of Conqueror's Haki here for the first time, knocking out an entire arena of people without even understanding what he did. But the lighthearted mood collapses entirely when Luffy learns through a newspaper that his brother Ace was captured after being defeated in battle by Blackbeard, that same grinning pirate from the bar back on Jaya, and that Ace is now scheduled to be publicly executed by the Marines to make an example of him. A love-struck Hancock agrees to help Luffy secretly infiltrate the world's single, most inescapable prison, the underwater fortress called Impel Down, to rescue his brother before it is too late. Inside this layered nightmare of a prison, descending through level after level of escalating hell, from the crimson hell of blade-leaf trees, to the wild beast hell, to the starvation hell, down to the burning hell and the freezing hell far below, Luffy battles through poison forests, ravenous jailer beasts, and freezing torture, teaming up along the way with a wild and unlikely assortment of old enemies turned reluctant allies, including Buggy the Clown, Mr. 3 from Alabasta, and most movingly of all, Bon Clay, the dancing Okama agent who returns and ultimately sacrifices his own freedom by impersonating the chief warden long enough to hold open a critical gate so that everyone else can flee the prison, waving them off with a smile while the Marines close in on him. Deep in the lowest level of the prison, the crew also crosses paths with Blackbeard, who has broken in specifically to recruit the most monstrous criminals in the world into his own growing crew. Luffy nearly dies after being run through with the deadly poison of the prison's chief warden Magellan, whose own body produces lethal venom, and is barely dragged back from death's door by a flamboyant revolutionary commander named Emporio Ivankov, who can alter a person's very hormones to force their body to keep fighting through a full day of agony. Luffy also frees a powerful, deeply honorable fishman named Jimbei and even his old enemy Crocodile, assembling a chaotic breakout army on the way up. But here is the cruel twist that gut punches everyone. Luffy fights his way to the surface only to discover that Ace has already been transferred out, moved ahead of schedule to the Marine headquarters for execution, meaning this entire impossible jailbreak was nothing more than the warm-up. This all launches directly into the Marineford War, the single biggest and most consequential event in the entire series up to this point, a public execution staged by the Marines specifically to crush the Age of Pirates and prove their absolute power to the world. Ace's captain, the legendary Edward Newgate, far better known as Whitebeard, the strongest man in the world, and one of the 4 emperors who loved Ace like a true son, brings his entire massive fleet and all of his allied crews to open war against the absolute full might of the Marines to save him. We are talking 3 admirals. The fleet admiral Sengoku, who can transform into a giant golden Buddha, the hero Garp, the assembled 7 warlords, and an endless ocean of soldiers, all standing against the most feared pirate alive and his fiercely loyal sons, including powerful division commanders like the immortal Phoenix Marco and the diamond-bodied Jozu. The Marines played dirty from the start, manipulating one of Whitebeard's own allied captains, Squardo, into stabbing the old man through the chest with a lie, and they dropped the entire bay behind an enormous wall of ice. Luffy crashes into the middle of the battlefield with his entire Impel Down breakout crew, fighting tooth and nail through a literal war zone, unleashing a massive burst of rare Conqueror's haki that knocks out thousands of soldiers at once, all just to reach his brother chained to the execution platform. A young Marine named Kobe, Luffy's old friend, is caught in the middle of the carnage and eventually finds the courage to scream at everyone to stop the meaningless slaughter. For one glorious, breathless moment, it actually looks like they are going to pull it off. The execution is botched, Ace is freed, the 2 brothers fight back to back across the plaza, and hope surges through everyone watching. And then, in one of the most devastating scenes in all of anime, the Magma Admiral Akainu deliberately taunts the honor of Whitebeard's crew, and when a furious Ace turns back to defend that honor, Akainu thrusts a molten magma fist straight toward Luffy's heart. Ace throws his own body in the way at the last second, taking the full molten blow straight through the chest meant for his little brother, and dies slowly in Luffy's arms. His final words, a tearful thank you to Luffy and the whole crew, and to his father Whitebeard, for loving him and letting him live, despite the fact that he was the son of the previous Pirate King, and had spent his whole life believing he never deserved to be born. Luffy, who fought through a literal war to save his brother, completely shuts down, his mind shattering on the spot. Whitebeard, already mortally wounded and standing tall, makes his final stand to avenge his son, single-handedly tearing the Marine headquarters apart and declaring with his dying breath to the entire watching world that the One Piece is absolutely, undeniably real and waiting out there for someone to find it, before dying on his feet, riddled with hundreds of wounds and not a single one on his back, never once falling backward. The war then takes an unprecedented, history-altering turn when Blackbeard and his crew of freed Impel Down prisoners arrive, and Blackbeard does the supposedly impossible, draping a black cloth over the dying Whitebeard's body and somehow stealing his earthquake powers, becoming the only person in history ever to wield 2 devil fruits at the same time. As the chaos reaches its absolute peak and a broken, catatonic Luffy is about to be killed where he kneels, red-haired Shanks himself finally arrives with his entire crew to forcibly bring the war to a close, planting his flag in the middle of the battlefield and daring anyone to keep fighting. The fishman Jimbei scoops up the shattered Luffy and carries him through the carnage, and Trafalgar Law, who had appeared with his submarine, takes the dying boy aboard and uses his surgical powers to barely keep him alive. Luffy is dragged away, broken and clinging to life, and the entire balance of power across the whole world shifts overnight. Damn, this is the arc that genuinely breaks people. In the aftermath, a shattered, grief-stricken Luffy completely cannot cope with the loss of Ace, and very nearly falls apart for good, until Jimbei refuses to leave his side and pulls him back from the edge by reminding him over and over that he still has a crew out there, alive and waiting for their captain. We then get the full gut-wrenching reveal, told through an extended flashback after Luffy rings a memorial bell 16 times to honor the dead and signal that he is still alive. That Luffy and Ace had a third sworn brother when they were children, a kind, noble, born runaway named Sabo, who dreamed of one day sailing the seas to write a book about the whole wide world. The three boys, the hot-tempered Ace, the runaway noble Sabo, and the little crybaby Luffy, grew up together as wild kids in the mountains, and drank sake together to seal their brotherhood as family in the forests above their hometown. But Sabo's cruel, status-obsessed noble family dragged him back home, and when the nobles secretly set fire to the entire slum called the Grey Terminal to clean up the city before a royal visit, Sabo decided he could not stand that rotten kingdom for another second. As he tried to set sail on his own little boat to finally be free, a passing celestial dragon casually blasted his boat out of the water for daring to cross its path, and everyone, including Ace and Luffy, came to believe that he had died that day, though Dragon's revolutionaries secretly pulled his burned body from the sea. Hold that thought. Seriously, hold it tight. Instead of immediately rushing back to regroup with his crew after Marineford, Luffy makes an incredibly hard and mature call. He sends a secret coded message to his entire scattered crew through a newspaper photograph, telling them not to come to him yet, but to each spend 2 more years training and growing stronger before they all reunite. It costs them precious time and tests their faith, but it is the only way any of them will survive the brutal new world ahead. Luffy himself trains intensely under Silver's Rayleigh, the legendary former right-hand man of the late Pirate King Gold Roger, mastering the 3 forms of the spiritual power called Haki, which lets a skilled user sense others around them, harden their body like invisible armor, and in extremely rare cases overwhelm and dominate the very will of weaker enemies. Each crewmate trains in their own scattered corner of the world too, with Zoro swallowing his pride to beg his old rival Mihawk for training, Sanji surviving an island of Okama martial artists, Nami studying weather science, Usopp toughening up on a survival island, Chopper learning medicine in a kingdom of birds, Robin joining the Revolutionary Army, Frankie raiding Vegapunk's old lab for upgrades, and Brook becoming a famous rock star. 2 full years pass, every single member of the crew levels up dramatically, and they all reunite back at Sabaody, having each grown so much that they barely recognize how strong the others have become, ready at last to take on the new world as a completely different, far deadlier crew. Their reunion, after 2 years apart and the trauma of Marineford, is pure joy. The new and vastly improved Straw Hats descend at last into the second half of the Grand Line, beginning their journey through the new world at Fishman Island, a magnificent, glowing kingdom resting at the very bottom of the sea inside an enormous protective bubble. Here the crew is forced to confront head-on the deep, ugly, generations-old racial hatred between humans and fishmen. The very same poison that once created Arlong back in the East Blue. A militant, steroid-pumped fishman named Hody Jones plots to overthrow the kingdom's gentle royal family and ignite an all-out genocidal race war against the surface world, fueled entirely by an inherited hatred he never even earned through any real experience of his own. He and his crew chug dangerous energy steroids that crank up their power while rapidly aging their bodies, and they have a deranged ally named Vanderdecken who can throw any object, including an enormous ancient ship called Noah, straight at the princess he is obsessed with. The crew rushes to protect the kingdom, and Luffy befriends a giant, gentle, perpetually crying mermaid princess named Shirahoshi, who unknowingly holds the power of an ancient weapon called Poseidon, able to command the colossal sea kings themselves. We learn the heartbreaking history of the island through two tragic figures: a saintly queen named Otohime, who spent her life gathering signatures and fighting to bridge the gap between species before being assassinated in a plot the young Hody helped engineer, and the heroic fishman Fisher Tiger, a former slave of the celestial dragons who broke into their holy land, liberated countless other slaves of all races, and founded the Sun Pirates, but ultimately died of his wounds, unable to fully forgive humanity for what had been done to his people, refusing even a human blood transfusion that could have saved his life. We also learn this is all tied deeply to Jinbei's own past, since he was a member of those same Sun Pirates under Fisher Tiger, and later became a warlord, and he carries enormous guilt over having once let the monstrous Arlong loose on the East Blue. Luffy crushes Hody decisively, and declares to the entire kingdom that the Straw Hats will gladly shoulder the heavy burden of that hatred themselves, so that the next generation does not have to carry it, earning the entire kingdom's gratitude and undying support, with many of the fishmen and merfolk now dreaming of one day living up on the surface in peace. When Big Mom's candy tribute is destroyed in the chaos and the kingdom panics, Luffy boldly takes responsibility, and declares over the line that he will simply take Big Mom's head and her whole territory himself, which is an insane thing to promise an emperor and exactly the kind of thing that puts him on her radar. We also learn that this whole region of the sea sits under the protection of one of the four emperors, a terrifying, candy-obsessed giant of a woman named Big Mom, who taxes the island in sweets, and has promised to burn the place to the seafloor the moment her tribute stops arriving. Remember her well, because the crew is now on a direct collision course with her. Surfacing into the brutal new world at last, the crew's next major arc kicks off on Punk Hazard, a bizarre island that is somehow half scorching fire and half frozen ice, the abandoned former site of horrific government experiments. Here the crew forms a shaky but absolutely pivotal alliance with Trafalgar Law, the supernova surgeon from Sabaody, who proposes a daring partnership specifically aimed at bringing down one of the four emperors, telling Luffy that to take the throne of the Pirate King, he will eventually have to defeat the most powerful men in the world anyway, so they may as well start now. Luffy agrees almost instantly, on the simple condition that Law promises not to betray his friends. They go up against a deranged, gas-powered mad scientist named Caesar Clown, a former colleague of the great Dr. Vegapunk, who is secretly mass-producing chemical weapons of mass destruction and cruelly experimenting on kidnapped children by feeding them a drug that turns them into rampaging giants while slowly killing them. The crew grows especially attached to the captive kids, and a brave little girl named Mocha sacrifices her own safety by swallowing a whole batch of the addictive drug to keep the others from taking it, nearly dying to save her friends. Caesar even unleashes a horrifying weaponized gas called Shinokuni that turns living people to stone-like husks. Things get personal when a corrupt high-ranking Marine named Virgo, secretly one of Doflamingo's men, turns on Law and steals Smoker's literal heart, which Law had surgically removed. The crew defeats Caesar, kidnaps him as a bargaining chip, frees the children, and Luffy and Law formally announce their pirate alliance to the world, openly declaring their intent to take down the Emperor Kaido, the self-proclaimed strongest single creature in the entire world. Along the way, the crew also rescues a samurai named Kinhimon, and a strange little dragon boy named Momonosuke from a mysterious, sealed-off nation called Wano. And there is a wonderfully chaotic body-swapping subplot where Law scrambles a whole group of people's minds into all the wrong bodies. That alliance leads the crew straight into Dressrosa, a dazzling, festive kingdom secretly ruled with an iron fist by one of the most genuinely, irredeemably evil men in the entire series, the warlord Don Quixote Doflamingo. Doflamingo is a string man who can control people's bodies like helpless living puppets and slice through almost anything with razor-thin threads. And behind his ever-present sunglasses, he has secretly been running a massive underworld brokerage for years, supplying Kaido with the artificial devil fruits that power his beast army. This arc is absolutely enormous and sprawling. The crew slowly uncovers that Doflamingo violently overthrew the rightful royal Riku family a decade ago and seized the throne using a young devil fruit user named Sugar, whose horrifying power erases people from existence entirely by turning them into mindless toys and simultaneously wiping the memory of every single person who ever knew or loved them, which is how an entire kingdom forgot it was being enslaved. To break the spell, the tiny Tontada dwarves and the crew launch a desperate plan called Operation Sop to knock out Sugar and shatter her power, instantly restoring everyone's memories and turning the whole island against Doflamingo at once. We meet a one-legged tragic former gladiator named Kairos and his daughter Rebecca, the last of the lost royal bloodline, along with the dwarves who helped lead the secret rebellion. In a massive, fist-pumping, tears-in-your-eyes moment, Sabo, Luffy's supposedly dead third sworn brother, returns very much alive as a high-ranking commander of the Revolutionary Army, and he enters the kingdom's gladiator tournament in disguise, alongside a colorful cast of fighters like the loyal fanboy Bartolomeo and the vain swordsman Cavendish, all to win Ace's old Flame Devil Fruit and ensure that a living piece of their fallen brother carries on through him. We also get Trafalgar Law's own crushing backstory here, how as a dying child from a city poisoned by lead, he was saved body and soul by Doflamingo's own kind-hearted younger brother, a clumsy, mute agent named Corazon, who gave his life to smuggle Law to safety and free him from Doflamingo's influence. That is why Law's entire plan has always been personal revenge. We also meet Doflamingo's brutal top officers, the stone-bodied Pika who can merge with the entire island, the sticky schemer Treball, and the flamboyant Diamante, among others. The battle eventually sprawls across the entire kingdom, as Doflamingo traps everyone inside a colossal, inescapable shrinking cage of thread called the Bird Cage, and orders the terrified citizens to hunt and slaughter each other to the last. We even learn Doflamingo's own origin, that he was born a celestial dragon whose father gave up their godhood to live among normal people, and that a young, hate-filled Doflamingo murdered his own father and tried to claw his way back into heaven, becoming the monster he is now. Luffy debuts a brand new transformation here, Gear 4th, coating his inflated muscles in armored haki to become a bouncing, devastatingly powerful mode that finally lets him trade blows with a monster on Doflamingo's level, fighting side by side with Law in a desperate tag team while the slimy officer Treball tries to blow them all up. After a long, grueling, kingdom-leveling fight, with the whole island desperately working together to slow the shrinking birdcage by pushing back against it with their bare hands, Luffy winds up a colossal haki-charged punch the size of a building, the King Kong gun, and slams the warlord straight down through the bedrock, taking him down for good. Toppling Doflamingo sends violent shockwaves through the entire criminal underworld, cripples Kaido's whole weapon and fruit supply chain, and finally frees Dressrosa. In gratitude, 7 separate powerful pirate crews, led by colorful captains like the loyal Bartolomeo and the flashy Cavendish, kneel and swear their loyalty to Luffy in a grand ceremony, forming a massive straw hat grand fleet sworn to come running whenever he calls, even though Luffy insists they are all free and equal, not his subordinates. And Luffy's bounty leaps to a staggering 500 million berries, placing him squarely on the world's radar as a serious future menace. A new, fair-blind admiral named Fujitora, who controls gravity itself, has every chance to capture the exhausted crew, but quietly chooses to look the other way and let them escape, having lost all faith in the corrupt warlord system. The crew then sails to Zoo, an island that sits on the back of a single colossal elephant the size of an entire country, an elephant that has been continuously walking through the sea for over 1,000 years without ever stopping. Yes, genuinely, that is the island. There they joyfully reunite with their separated crewmates and meet a tribe of noble animal people called the Minks, led by 2 dukes named Inmurashi and Neko Mamushi, who rule by day and by night, only to find the island freshly devastated by a recent assault from one of Kaido's top commanders, a mammoth fishman named Jack, who had been tearing the place apart, searching for a hidden ninja named Raizo connected to Wano. The Minks reveal they have a secret transformation called Sulong that makes them monstrously powerful under a full moon. The crew also uncovers a crucial piece of the entire endgame puzzle here, a road poneglyph, one of only 4 special red stones that, when their information is combined, reveal the exact location of the final island, Laugh-Tale, where the One Piece itself is said to wait. Meanwhile, Sanji receives a wedding invitation, revealing that he has been summoned home by his estranged, powerful, and cold-blooded family, the Vinsmokes, military killers who rule a mercenary science nation called Germa 66, and that he has been arranged to marry into Big Mom's family as part of a political alliance. Rather than ask for help, Sanji secretly leaves a note and slips away to spare the crew, even striking Luffy to push him away. But Luffy refuses to give up on his cook for a single second. Luffy splits the crew once again, sending one team ahead toward Wano while he personally leads a rescue team to bring Sanji home, flatly refusing to let his cook be dragged into a loveless life he never chose. That rescue mission takes the crew deep into Whole Cake Island, the bizarre candy-coated home territory of the Emperor Big Mom, and it is one of the single most nerve-shredding, high-tension arcs in the entire show. Big Mom, whose real name is Charlotte Linlin, is a monstrous, childlike giant who collects rare races as living trophies, can literally rip years of lifespan straight out of people's souls, and will mindlessly murder anything in her path the instant one of her violent eating disorders flares up. We learn that Sanji comes from a genuinely horrifying family who emotionally abused him and locked him in an iron mask as a child, simply for being too kind and too human compared to his three cold, genetically enhanced brothers, with only his gentle older sister, Reiju, ever showing him a shred of love, secretly unlocking his cell and urging him to run away to chase his dream of becoming a cook, which is the very journey that eventually washed him up at Zeph's restaurant in the first place. His arranged bride, a sweet-seeming three-eyed girl named Pudding, is secretly part of an elaborate plot for Big Mom to assassinate the entire Vinsmoke family during the wedding ceremony and steal their technology. And yet, despite every cruelty his family ever inflicted on him, Sanji ultimately cannot bring himself to abandon even the relatives who hated him when their lives are on the line, revealing the sheer depth of his heart. Along the way, Luffy fights one of Big Mom's strongest sons, the biscuit-armored Charlotte Cracker, in an absurd days-long battle where Luffy has to eat his way through an endless army of biscuit soldiers. Along the way, Luffy fights one of Big Mom's strongest sons, the biscuit-armored Charlotte Cracker, in an absurd, days-long battle where Luffy has to eat his way through an endless army of biscuit soldiers until he is bloated and sick just to reach the real man, while Nami tames one of Big Mom's own Stormcloud homies named Zeus and adds it to her arsenal. At his lowest point, starving and stranded in a forest after the fight, Luffy is nursed back to strength by Nami and friends so he can keep going. We also learn Big Mom's own monstrous origin, how as a giant orphan child she was raised by a saintly caretaker named Mother Carmel, only for Carmel and an entire room of children to mysteriously vanish, presumably accidentally devoured. The very day Big Mom's terrible hunger and powers first awakened, the crew pulls off a wildly chaotic, against all odds plan to crash the wedding, expose the assassination plot to everyone, and shatter a giant beloved portrait of Mother Carmel to send the Emperor into a screaming, building, collapsing emotional meltdown that even rattles her own living weapons. Her son homie, Prometheus, Stormcloud Zeus, and Talking Sword Napoleon, with even Pudding having a secret change of heart and tearfully helping Sanji in the end by baking the very cake that calms her mother. Along the way, Luffy gets his most thrilling fight in the arc against one of Big Mom's strongest and proudest sons, Charlotte Katakuri, a master of future sight hockey who has never once been knocked off his feet and never let anyone see his back, in a long, breathtaking one-on-one duel that spirals through a mirror world over what feels like days. Katakuri can turn his body into stretchy mochi, perfectly counter every move Luffy makes by seeing a few seconds into the future, and he beats Luffy down again and again. But Luffy refuses to stay down, and in pushing himself past his absolute limit, he finally awakens his own observational haki to that same level, briefly seeing into the future just like his opponent, and matches him blow for blow. In a moment of pure respect between warriors, Katakuri even wounds himself so the two of them are on perfectly even footing, and after Luffy finally wins, he honors his fallen opponent rather than gloating, earning the deep, lasting respect of a previously undefeated man. The crew finally escapes an entire Emperor's territory by the skin of their teeth, in part by appeasing the rampaging Big Mom with a single cake so impossibly magically delicious that it literally stops her dead in her tracks, which is the single most one-piece solution to a problem imaginable. Jinbei stays behind to personally hold off Big Mom's entire fleet so the crew can get away, nearly dying in the process, while the mink carrot transforms into her monstrous, white-furred Salong form under the full moon, and a giant friendly fishman named Wadatsumi helps fling the Thousand Sunny clear of the pursuing ships. Crucially, during all of this, the noble fishman Jimbei formally cuts his ties to the Emperor Big Mom at enormous personal risk, refusing to bow to her any longer, and pledges his complete loyalty to the Straw Hats, eventually catching up to the crew in Wano and taking his rightful place at last as the crew's helmsman and 10th and final corps member. After everything that goes down here, including a botched assassination attempt on Big Mom by an allied mafia captain named Capone Beige, who can literally turn his own body into a walking fortress full of soldiers, Luffy's reputation across the world explodes once again, the newspapers crown him a rising threat and even mistakenly call him the fifth emperor of the sea. And people everywhere begin openly whispering that this rookie pirate has somehow climbed all the way up to challenging the emperors themselves. Around this same time, the story cuts away to a massive global political summit called the Reverie, where the kings and royal families of dozens of allied nations gather in the holy capital, including Vivi and her father King Cobra from Alabasta, Shirahoshi and King Neptune from Fishman Island, and even old faces like the recovered Wapol and the Dressrosa allies, many of them now quietly friends of the Straw Hats. Enormous, world-altering things quietly move behind the scenes here. We learn that the Revolutionary Army, led by Luffy's father Dragon, and now openly featuring Sabo, has dramatically escalated its war against the world government, recently clashing with the Marines and burning a national symbol. And in the single most ominous reveal of the entire series so far, we glimpse the true, hidden power that sits above even the world nobles themselves. An ancient council of 5 sinister, near immortal elders called the 5 Elders, who answer in turn to a hidden, mysterious figure seated upon an empty throne in a secret room deep beneath the Holy Land, a ruler named Im. This shadowy figure guards some unimaginable, world-ending national treasure hidden beneath the Holy Land, quietly marks certain specific people across the world for death, including both the kind-hearted Vivi and the gentle Shirahoshi, simply for what they represent, and gazes coldly at wanted posters of the most dangerous threats alive, including Luffy and Blackbeard. Word also spreads that Sabo clashed with the Marines and a king at the summit, and may even have died, throwing the whole revolutionary cause into chaos. The simple, joyful pirate adventure we started with has now quietly transformed into a sweeping story about who truly controls the entire world and the terrible buried history they have killed countless people to keep hidden. Keep absolutely all of that in your back pocket. Every single road in the story now leads directly to Wano, the longest and arguably most beloved arc in the entire series, where the crew finally takes their real shot at the Emperor Kaido himself. Wano is an isolated, fiercely independent samurai nation styled after feudal Japan, sealed off from the world and ruled by a cruel, paranoid shogun named Kurozumi Orochi, who serves Kaido and has poisoned the once beautiful land into a toxic, polluted wasteland where the common people starve to death while the corrupt capital lives in gluttonous luxury. The Straw Hats join forces with the proud surviving samurai of Wano, the rival crews of both Law and Kid, the animal people Minks, and a hidden resistance movement, all united under one shared purpose: to raid Kaido's island fortress, kill the puppet shogun, and free the entire country at last. To understand exactly why any of this matters so deeply, the show delivers the towering, devastating backstory of Kazuki Oden, a wild, larger-than-life samurai who decades earlier left Wano to sail first with Whitebeard and then with Gold Roger himself, even reaching the legendary final island and learning the buried truth of the world along the way. Oden's entire life is a tragedy of loyalty and sacrifice. As a wild young man too big for his sheltered country, he desperately wanted to see the outside world, and he eventually got his wish by joining the crew of Whitebeard himself, becoming one of his commanders, before later transferring to sail with Gold Roger on the final leg of his journey to the last island. Oden was one of the only people alive to reach Laugh-Tale and learn the full buried truth of the world and the meaning of the Will of D. He returned home with his wife Toki, who had her own power to leap forward through time, determined to open Wano's borders. But he was betrayed and framed by the scheming Orochi and the overwhelming Kaido, partly through the treachery of a spy hiding among his own retainers named Kinjuro. Odin was finally executed in the most brutal way imaginable, sentenced to be boiled alive in a giant pot of oil, and he endured it by standing on a platform and holding his loyal retainers up above the scalding surface on his own arms to keep them alive for as long as humanly possible, buying their survival with his own agony for a full hour before he died. Before his death, Odin left behind a journal of his travels and a final desperate wish that Wano's borders would be opened in exactly 20 years, when a new generation of warriors gathered to finish the fight he started. That very moment has now arrived. His young son Momonosuke, the same little dragon boy the crew met on Punk Hazard, was secretly sent forward through time by Odin's wife Toki to lead the future rebellion, and Odin's 9 fiercely devoted retainers, the 9 red scabbards, have waited decades, scarred and aging, for this exact night to finally take their revenge. The crew spends the first half of the arc gathering allies in secret across the poisoned country, recruiting starving townsfolk and old samurai. While we meet figures like Odin's lost daughter Hiyori, who has been hiding for years disguised as the most famous courtesan in the capital, and a noble old lord named Yasue, who publicly sacrifices his own life and reputation, laughing on the execution stand to throw off suspicion and protect the rebels' identities, leaving behind a grieving little girl named Toko. When the secret plan to gather at a certain port leaks and almost falls apart, the Alliance scrambles to change the meeting point and presses on regardless, using the cover of the country's grand fire festival to launch their assault. The raid on Kaido's mountaintop stronghold, the island of Onigashima, consumes the entire back half of the arc in one massive, sprawling, all-out war, with the Alliance storming the gates during Kaido's drunken fire festival party, while he announces a terrifying plan to drag all of Wano into a new age of weapons and war. Things go from merely bad to outright nightmarish when Big Mom herself shows up at the island and forms a temporary alliance with Kaido, meaning the crew now has to somehow take down 2 separate emperors in a single night. Luffy gets brutally beaten and even seemingly killed and dumped into the sea fairly early on, only to be rescued, healed, and dragged right back into the fight, building him up the hard way. Throughout the battle, he learns to channel the most advanced known form of armament haki, coding his attacks in pure, invisible force and even striking enemies from a distance without physical contact, and he climbs to the fortress roof to go blow for blow with Kaido in a clash that literally levels the floating island itself. We also meet Yamato, Kaido's own rebellious child who idolizes the late Odin so completely that they have taken his name and fight against their own father for Wano's freedom, even holding Kaido off in single combat for a time deep inside the fortress. Things go from merely bad to outright nightmarish, by the way, when Big Mom herself, fresh off chasing the crew all the way from Whole Cake Island, washes up in Wano and forms a temporary alliance with Kaido, the 2 emperors agreeing to team up and even talking openly about forming an unstoppable partnership to find the One Piece themselves. In a legendary sequence, the 5 strongest young captains of the Alliance, Luffy, Zoro, Law, Kid, and Killer, all charge the fortress roof together to take on Kaido and Big Mom side by side. The crew also has to grind through Kaido's monstrous right-hand all-stars, the firefighting brawler Queen and the Lunarian King, while the 9 red scabbards take their long-awaited shot at Kaido, and Law and Kid team up against Big Mom. Zoro inherits Odin's own legendary cursed sword, Enma, which constantly tries to drain all of his haki, and he pushes himself to the brink of death against King to protect the Alliance, surviving a wound that should have killed him. Sanji, meanwhile, discovers that the cruel genetic modifications his family forced on him as a child are finally awakening, granting him a near-invincible exoskeleton and superhuman speed. Even as he fears losing his own warm humanity and becoming the emotionless killer his father wanted, a fear his crew helps him push through so he can stay the kind cook he chose to be. And then comes the single reveal that completely recontextualizes the entire 20-plus years of the series up to this point. Luffy's devil fruit, it turns out, was never actually just a simple gum-gum fruit at all. It is, in truth, an extraordinarily rare mythical Zoan fruit, the living embodiment of a legendary figure from the lost void of history known as the sun god Nika, a warrior of liberation who is said to have freed slaves and fought with boundless, contagious joy. The world government feared this fruit and everything it represented so deeply that for 800 straight years they renamed it the Gum Gum fruit and relentlessly hunted it, trying to keep it from ever reaching the world. When Luffy's heart finally stops beating and then roars back to life to the rhythm of liberation, after being beaten down and seemingly killed more than once across the long raid, this true power awakens, and he transforms into a radiant, white-haired form he comes to call Gear Fifth, the awakening of his fruit. In this form, he can warp reality and the world around him like a living cartoon, turning the very ground and even Kaido's iron club to bouncy rubber, growing to titanic size, swinging from clouds, and fighting on nothing but pure freedom and laughter, with his heartbeat acting like the drums of liberation that herald the return of a legend. It is absurd, it is breathtaking, and it is the single most perfectly Luffy power imaginable, a fruit whose entire core theme is liberation finally awakening inside the freest man alive. With this new power, he at last defeats Kaido for good, sending the Emperor crashing down through the earth into the magma deep beneath the island, and ending his reign over one of the four emperors. The whole sky over Wano lighting up with the colors of a new dawn as the people below cheer the fall of a tyrant they thought would rule forever. At the very same time, deep in the bowels of the same fortress, the rival captains Law and Kid, two former supernovas who came up alongside Luffy, set aside their mutual hatred and combined their devil fruit abilities to bring down Big Mom in a brutal exchange, blasting the screaming Emperor down into the same magma chamber as Kaido and toppling a second Yonko in the same single night. Something the world would have called impossible only a day earlier. Meanwhile, as the whole fortress of Onigashima threatens to crash down onto the helpless flower capital and crush everyone below, Momonosuke finally grows into a full adult dragon and physically holds the entire flying island up in the air long enough to move it aside, saving his people just as his father once dreamed. Orochi, the cowardly puppet shogun, is finally cut down by Oden's daughter Hiyori and a loyal retainer named Denjiro after one last desperate scheme. The wretched shogun's reign collapses, Wano is fully liberated, and Momonosuke takes his rightful place as the new leader so the country can finally choose its own future, 20 years after his father's dream. In the global fallout, the entire world power structure violently reshuffles. The old system of government-sanctioned warlords is abolished entirely, and almost completely by accident, Luffy is officially declared one of the new four emperors of the sea, now standing among the very monsters he just toppled, alongside Blackbeard, who has been quietly building his own pirate empire. The resurgent Shanks and, hilariously, Luffy's old East Blue rival, Buggy the Clown, who stumbles his way into emperor status almost entirely by luck and the reputation of the strong crewmates who now follow him around without his understanding. The scrawny rubber kid from that little bar back in Fuchsia Village is now genuinely one of the most powerful and feared pirates alive on the planet. Pure goosebumps. The hard-won celebration is barely even allowed to begin before a starving marine admiral named Ryokugyo, a plant man also called Green Bull who can sprout life from his own body, flies into the country entirely on his own without a ship just to invade the still weakened nation and claim a trophy, only to be driven off by Luffy, Yamato, and the new generation of pirates fighting together, sending a crystal clear signal to the entire world that these rookies are now a true global threat that the Marines can no longer hope to contain. That brings us right up to the current chapter of the saga, the Egghead Arc, set on the futuristic, technology-drenched island laboratory of the world's single most brilliant mind, the scientist Dr. Vegapunk, a man so far ahead of his time that he split his own consciousness into 6 separate android satellite bodies, each one a different facet of his personality, like wisdom, evil, greed, and violence, just to keep up with his own ideas. The crew is also caught between 2 government agents who turn out to have their own loyalties, including a clone woman named Stussy from the elite CP-0. The crew arrives looking for help, ship repairs, and answers about the strange historical poneglyphs and the world itself, only to get swept directly into a deadly government conspiracy when the world government abruptly decides that Vegapunk, having learned far too many forbidden truths over the years, must be permanently silenced, and dispatches its absolute top forces to wipe out him and everyone standing with him. This arc at last begins violently ripping the curtain off the show's oldest and deepest buried mysteries. The crew meets a fellow supernova named Jewelry Bonnie, a girl who can change her own and others' ages at will, and who turns out to be the daughter of Bartholomew Kuma, the silent warlord who scattered the entire crew across the world years ago at Sabaody. She has come to Egghead chasing the truth about what happened to the loving father she barely remembers. Kuma's full backstory finally gets told here, and it is one of the most crushing in the entire series. A kind, gentle, deeply faithful man descended from a persecuted bloodline tied to that very same liberator Nika, Kuma slowly gave up his own mind, his memories, his pain receptors, and his free will piece by agonizing peace, willingly allowing the government to convert him into a mindless human weapon, all in order to earn medical treatment for his dying daughter Bonnie and to protect the powerless people he loved. It absolutely wrecks you, especially the revelation of his final journey and the last shred of free will he secretly preserved. The Marines send in the Light Admiral Kizaru, who has a personal history with Vegapunk, along with a squad of terrifying child-shaped superweapons called the Seraphim, modeled on the warlords and given the powers of the ancient winged Lunarian race. And far more terrifyingly, one of the 5 elders themselves physically descends onto the island in person, revealing that these ancient rulers are not frail old men at all, but monstrous, near-immortal beings who transform into grotesque mythical creatures, led by a figure named Saturn. It turns out the betrayal came from inside, with one of Vegapunk's own 6 satellite personalities, the greedy York, selling the others out in a desperate bid to become a celestial dragon herself. The crew, with the crucial help of Vegapunk and his several distinct android personalities, plus a reawakened ancient iron giant tied to the lost century, scrambles desperately to simply survive the night and escape the island, as the world's absolute highest authorities close in from every single side at once. Luffy goes gear 5th to fight the speed of Light Admiral Kizaru and even the monstrous Saturn himself, with his old ally Sentomaru, Kuma's former handler, turning on the government to help the crew, and the giant robot rising to defend Vegapunk's lab in a moment that ties straight back to the lost ancient kingdom. The single biggest, most important moment of the entire arc is Vegapunk's secret plan to broadcast one final message to the entire world. A recorded transmission rigged to release no matter what happens to him personally, revealing the buried truths that the world government has murdered countless people across centuries to keep hidden forever. The message touches on secrets about the lost 100 years of history, an entire ancient kingdom that fought the precursors of the world government and was completely erased from every record on Earth. The identity of an ancient hero of liberation named Joy Boy, whose will and dream Luffy now carries forward. The true reason the government fears the letter D carried in the names of certain people. And a looming, catastrophic danger that Vegapunk discovered, that the sea level of the entire world has been slowly and secretly rising for centuries and may one day swallow every island beneath the waves. As the Straw Hats fight tooth and nail simply to survive the Admiral, the monstrous Elder, and the full naval blockade surrounding the island, Bonnie comes face to face with the truth of what her father Kuma gave up for her, and she briefly awakens her own Nika-like transformation after witnessing Luffy's, tying the powerful theme of inherited liberation across generations and across bloodlines. With the help of a friendly visiting crew of enormous warrior giants from the legendary land of Elbaf and Vegapunk's technology, the Straw Hats fight their way off the burning, sinking island, escaping by the absolute skin of their teeth, while the recorded message finally begins playing across every screen, speaker, and snail in the entire world at once. The story is now barreling forward at absolutely full speed toward its long-awaited final act. With the buried truth of the entire world about to be broadcast to everyone alive at once, the Straw Hats hunted relentlessly by the most powerful beings on the whole planet, and the dream of finally reaching the One Piece closer now than it has ever been in over 1,000 episodes. And that is exactly where this grand, sprawling adventure currently stands, still sailing, still gloriously unfinished, still building steadily toward an ending that devoted fans all over the world have been patiently waiting more than 2.5 decades to finally witness. And that was the entire story of One Piece so far. Honestly, trying to cram a monster of this size and scope into one single sitting almost feels like a crime, because so much of the real magic of One Piece lives in the tiny details. The throwaway setups that quietly pay off 300 episodes later, the goodbyes that absolutely wreck you, the way a goofy comedy arc can suddenly twist without warning into one of the most emotional stretches of storytelling you have ever experienced. At its beating heart, this is a story about freedom, about found family, and about chasing an impossible dream simply because some part of you refuses to accept the people who told you that you couldn't. It is about a kid who gives away his straw hat to no one, who would burn down the whole world before letting a single friend cry alone, and who somehow keeps winning by believing in people harder than anyone else ever would. Luffy started out as a kid that absolutely nobody believed in, mocked and laughed out of every bar on the map, and now the entire world knows his name and trembles whenever it gets spoken aloud. That, far more than any pile of treasure, is the whole point of all of it. If this recap got you in your feelings, or made you want to dive right back into the show from episode 1 all over again, then I have done my job well here. So tell me down in the comments, what is your absolute favorite arc of the whole journey? Was it the gut punch of Marineford, the catharsis of Enies Lobby, or the triumph of Wano? And who is your favorite straw hat of them all? Because I already know for a fact those replies are going to get heated. Throw a like on this video if you enjoyed the ride through all of it, and make sure you subscribe, because the very second this series makes its next big move, we are going to be covering every single bit of it. As always, thank you so much for watching all the way through, and we will see you next time.